Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. Well, the art world is in the final few weeks of the summer break until things really ramp up in September. We have art fairs, gallery openings, auctions, the whole gambit. One area of the art market that we don't touch on as often as we'd like is private sales. Private sales play an important role, in particular when the art world and the art market is perhaps in more uncertain, maybe softer moments. Private sales, of course, offer discretion for sellers, and from a buyer's perspective, when an opportunity arises, you might have the opportunity finally to acquire something really significant by an artist that you've been eyeing. And we think in this week's episode of the podcast, there's no one better to talk to about the private sales market than David Schrader, who used to lead private sales at Sotheby's and is a co-founder of the recently established gallery, Pace Di Donna Schrader Gallery. We hope you enjoy our conversation with David. Thanks so much for listening. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you having me and looking forward to chatting.
Absolutely. So I want to start with the establishment of your new gallery, Pace Di Donna Schrader. It happened late last year, and I think it was a bit unexpected by many within the art world. It brought together three names that perhaps people didn't expect. Tell us a little about the conversations behind the scenes, how this all came together, and what it was like when you finally established the gallery.
I think for us, it was a bit of a natural evolution. We'd all worked together over the last number of years where I had done shows with Emmanuel for the last 6 or 7 years in Palm Beach. He and Marc had been working together. Marc and I had been working together. And I think we saw a couple things happening. One was kind of a bottoming of negativity in the market, especially for secondary works, kind of, end of about a year ago today, kind of September of last year, which I think gave us a bit more confidence. We also felt that there weren't that many players dedicated purely to secondary market. And between the three of us, we really felt that we brought a kind of unique aspect, which was we can really cover, the last 150 years of art with Emmanuel's expertise, going back into Impressionism all the way into Surrealism, Marc being from, I would say the early 20th century to today, and mine being kind of post-war to present. And I think we also felt that we had, not a lot of overlap in clientele as well, where, Marc had greater expertise in Asia and certain parts of the country, and Emmanuel in Europe. So it was kind of a natural fit. And we felt the moment was right.
So around the time the launch of the gallery was announced, I remember reading Marc Glimcher said something to the effect of, we haven't had a great secondary market gallery in a long time, or there aren't many great ones right now. What exactly happened to that model, do you think, in which there aren't so many great secondary market galleries at the moment? And tell us a little bit more about why you ultimately decided to leave Sotheby's and pursue having a gallery.
I think there's something to putting on shows, and I think both Emmanuel and Marc have a long history of putting on rigorous art historical shows, which I think, one of the pillars that we've been thinking about is expertise, and the fact that a lot of expertise in the market has left, whether it be the auction houses or galleries, or moved on to greener pastures. So I think really to showcase, we felt that was important, not to do 20 shows a year, but to do 2 shows a year or 3 shows a year with art historical context. And look, there are great secondary dealers, but there's not 25 of them. You can kind of count on 2 hands. And whether that's the shoes haven't been refilled, or some of the secondary dealers are also primary dealers, so it's not their main focus. We just felt that there was an opening in the market to be dedicated very specifically to the high end, showcasing expertise, and coming at it from a bit of a different angle and a bit of a broader platform than maybe some of the other dealers have had.
And so tell us a little bit about how the gallery will actually operate. I know you already have participated in some art fairs, TAFAF, Art Basel. I saw you in Art Basel in Switzerland, and I know you'll continue to do that. But what's the day-to-day like at the gallery? Will there be exhibitions and shows? Or I know a private sales, secondary type model is a little bit different, of course, than a primary market gallery. So give us a little bit better sense as to how the gallery will actually operate.
Sure. So we're going to take over the space that Emmanuel's had for the last 10 years, where we will showcase shows starting this year, probably in the spring. And you'll see us in Basel, Paris, and then in fairs next year as well. But I think you'll see a mix of shows, again, sort of similar to what Emmanuel and Marc have been doing. And at the same time, we'll be doing private sales, quite bespoke, finding works for people, helping people sell discreetly. So we can also do advisory. It'll be a bit of jack of all trades.
And so the gallery launched at a very interesting moment in the art world late last year. I think you had a bit of uncertainty still in the market. There was some softening, although I do think there is more confidence now than there was late last year, especially after the relatively strong May auctions. But overall, I think when you have some uncertainty in the market, private sales in particular are a very interesting aspect of the art market. Sellers can be discreet. Buyers, I think, are still ready to pursue and acquire great works when they have the opportunity to do so. But tell us your read on what you're seeing in the art market now, in particular the secondary market, and within that, private sales.
I think you've seen, over the last 24 to 36 months, great opportunities to buy things at auction in the secondary field. And I think sort of as that's firmed up, it's given a nice backbone over the last, you saw, a strong October, strong November. You saw the New House, some of the Mnuchin works. You saw the Lewis sale in June. So I think, the market at the higher end needed some confidence, which we saw through the auction, to give people, really the confidence to come out and show works and know that the buyers are there. So I do think they're quite interlinked. And look, I think the question is, where do people want to go see art? Where are people traveling? How COVID has maybe changed where people are in the world. Are people in New York between January and March? They may not be. They might be in Palm Beach, or they might be traveling, or they might be in Aspen or Texas, or any number of places. So what's the right cost structure? And I think being able to come into the market sort of greenfield at a point when not many people are starting, I thought was pretty interesting. And coming at it from a cost structure that doesn't have a lot of historical weight to it.
And so, as we mentioned, before establishing the gallery, you were leading private sales at Sotheby's. It'd be great if you could share from your experiences what the perspective is lately, especially at the top of the art market, when consigners or potential consigners are thinking about selling a work and they are determining if they want to go the private sales route or the auction route.
Look, I think there's a very valid reason for both to exist. And I think some of it is personal preference and some of it is timing preference. I think when the market is frothy, auction, is a pretty attractive place to be, but it's also not discreet and pointed. And if you have a major work, you may not want it to be in the public forum. You may not want it to have the same level of exposure that an auction has. And we felt that in private sales. And if you go back to 2020, when the world was a bit rocky and COVID was going, I think it was the best year we ever had in private sales. So I do think it's counter-cyclical. And when there's moments of retrenchment, you see people pull back on their desire to put things at auction and take the risk. And when things are more jubilant, you see, a bit more exuberance to put things in. And especially, now that you've seen 12 months of positive results, I think that'll give people confidence in both sets of markets. And it just might be dependent on, what their either risk tolerance is, what their timing is. And a lot of what we do is people coming to us and looking for something specific and, which is just a bit of a different business. But I would say I'm pretty optimistic on, the 6 to 36 month ahead look. And, what I would say is the market is still reasonably narrow, and we have a lot more interest in the same 20 artists. And the question to me, when does that broaden out?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So tell us more about the shows maybe that you have planned at the gallery, or even some of the artists that you're planning on focusing on when it comes to private sales.
So, I mean, we really been kind of sticking to our knitting, I would say. And I think what you've seen at the last two fairs is a pretty good mix of the three of us, going from Rothko and Calder to Magritte and Dolly and Wilfredo Lamb to Ruche to Richter. So I think we're trying to stick to what we know and the artists that we, frankly, are passionate about, and we think are interesting moments. And I think you'll see us announce in the not too distant future a pretty exciting classical show for spring of next year, which we haven't put out yet. But I think that'll fit right within the genres that we've been thinking about. And I think you'll see us in Paris with a similar pretty classic mix of artists.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that presentation in Paris and looking forward to seeing you there as well.
What are you feeling your clients are looking at, and have you found that you've shied a bit more away from primary and gotten more into the secondary markets, whether it's auction or privately?
Yeah, that's absolutely a shift that I'm seeing from many of my clients. I work both on the primary and secondary market over the last several years, often on the primary market. While the primary market's great in many ways, when the art market is softer, when people are being more selective, unfortunately, prices on the primary market are a bit sticky and don't really respond to a retraction overall in the art market. And some of my clients are maybe focused on even on the same artist they were previously, but feel on the secondary market we can find them priced more appropriately in terms of where the actual art market is. And additionally, some of my clients are really expanding the group of artists that they're looking at, focused on more established artists from past generations that they feel are priced appropriately on the secondary market. And I think that's really great for any collector, really, to be able to focus on artists from different generations and to have artists in dialogue with one another within a collection, not necessarily just artists from a certain period or era. So I think something like that is really what gives curation to a collection and makes it special.
I agree. I mean, we've seen something similar, which is, people who had been in one sort of specific genre of the market having fun expanding and living with both, and living with contemporary and with classical, and even going all the way back in time to old masters in other categories.
And as we've discussed, the art market's in a very interesting time at the moment. I'm curious about the dynamic between buying and selling. And from your perspective, when you're engaged with your clients right now at this moment, do you feel like more of them are on the buying side, more on the selling side? How do you see that split at the moment?
Look, I think we're in a really interesting moment where there's more buyers than sellers of great works. And I think, the markets outside of art have been pretty robust for the last 2 or 3 years. And there isn't a great need to sell unless there's a specific hole that needs to be fed. So I think it's been harder to find the high quality works. A lot of what you've seen has been estate type material. But I think as we're getting pricing confidence and pricing data points, we are seeing a bit more confidence from sellers. And again, I think we've read quite a lot about the great, $1 trillion move of art over the next 20 years, I think was in Bloomberg last month, and sort of about a number of times. Like, that's real. And I think we're going to have an opportunity to see, some of the best works of the last 100 years coming to market, and some of that will come privately for sure.
Yeah, there's been so much coverage about this wealth transfer. I feel like in the last few weeks, it's been really interesting reading and following along in the press. And it's definitely a topic that's coming up in conversation within the art world. What are some of the key topics relating to this issue? Is it about how much art will be transferred? Whether the next generation is interested in art? Will they keep the art? Will they want to sell the art? What are some of the conversations around this topic that you're having?
I mean, look, it's real time, but I think we've seen, Lewis is sort of the last example when great material that's been off market for a long period of time comes, there's a lot of buyers. And relative to 5 years ago, 4 years ago, there's real depth of bid. There's not just one buyer, there's 5 or 6 in many cases. So I think there's appetite from collectors who've been dormant when great things come. And I think we're seeing over the last 12 months, new collectors come into the market. And I think with some of the monetizations, whether it's SpaceX or Anthropic or hundreds of other companies, we're seeing new entrants enter the market and old people who've been out of the market come back, especially when there's great trophy things to market or rarefied objects.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how all this plays out. David, thanks so much again for coming on and chatting with us about Pace Di Donna Schrader, as well as the art market in general, and even more particularly private sales within the art market. We really appreciate the conversation.
We, greatly appreciate you taking the time to have me on, and looking forward to being back and seeing you in Basel.
Thanks again. See you soon.